Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live Monday, and so happy to be back with you. Thank you so much for being here with us as we start another great week of programming here. Second hour today, Carlo Broussard is going to be here with us, and we're going to do the Bible blueprint for the church. There are many people who accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior, but do not accept the church. So we're going to look into the Bible and see where is the evidence that Christ is the founder of a church and that that church survives even into today. You are welcome to call whether you're Catholic or Protestant or none of the above. Second hour. First hour, I believe we are going to talk about, well, we are going to talk, but I believe that the topic we are going to talk about is one of the most vital, important topics of our time. It's one, in many ways, I think, that people are loath to speak about because it produces a great deal of anxiety in us. We're not exactly sure which way to go, which direction is the moral direction to go with the whole topic of transgenderism. And we have one of the best people in the world to help us talk about transgenderism this hour. You're welcome to call 888-318-7884 if you have a question, if you'd like to get involved. And certainly this hour, anyone is welcome to call, whether you're Catholic or not, whether you're a believer or not. If you want to have an intelligent, respectful, honest conversation about the whole transgender movement, 888-318-7884. Our guest is Mary Rice Hasson. She's the Kate O'Byrne Fellow in Catholic Studies at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C. She also directs the Catholic Women's Forum, a network of Catholic professional women and scholars seeking to amplify the voice of Catholic women in support of the human dignity, authentic freedom, and Catholic social teaching. She's a mother of 7. She's the author of a whole bunch of stuff, and we are just so happy to get to welcome her back again. Mary Rice Hasson, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to talk with you.
Do you think I'm right that there's a certain kind of cringe element to this? It's so intimate, it's so personal, and we just don't know what to do about transgenderism, how to deal with it.
Yeah, I think there's a natural desire to want to ensure that everyone's dignity is respected, that people who are hurting have support, and that they don't perceive that we're being callous or indifferent to suffering. But by the same token, there's a lot of confusion around there, or out there in the culture, in terms of responses, in terms of what the law should do, in terms of what Catholic schools should do. And so this is a difficult topic. And in fact, when I started speaking about it, say 4 or 5 years ago, I would, at the end of a talk, how people come up, people would come up and say, well, my neighbor's best friend's daughter is experiencing issues around identity or is identified as transgender. Now, at the end of a talk, there are multiple people coming up and saying, it's my daughter, it's my son, it's someone I'm close to, someone I love. So I think these issues, as the culture has been saturated by gender ideology, these issues are hitting closer to home.
Again, our number 888-318-7884. You are welcome to call with your questions for our guest, Mary Rice Hasson. It seems, and I imagine this might be one of the things you get canceled for saying, but it seems so obvious that there's some kind of contagion going on, that young people are almost being, I don't know, encouraged, and in many ways, it's a sneaky kind of like, well, everyone's talking about this, so this is a way of getting attention, or this is the way of me being special. Do you have the sense that there's a kind of contagion of transgenderism?
Yeah, we can see it in the numbers. So, for example, Gallup just came out with a poll that said of this youngest generation, Generation Z, which is in high school and early college, we have about 16% of that generation identifying as LGBTQ. And of that number, about 2 to 3% are transgender identified. And that may not sound like a lot, but even 10 years ago, those numbers would have been less than 1%.
Yeah.
In other words, there have always been people who've struggled with identity, but now we're seeing this just really increasing, and the numbers, particularly in terms of adolescents, is spiking. So it's definitely a growing problem. But I think the thing to perhaps for your listeners to realize is that this issue is something that's affecting the entire culture. So even if it's not affecting you and confusing you about who you are, it's changing everything about how we live, how we relate, how we speak. And so that, people need to realize this is affecting your life.
Yeah, it is. It's everywhere. I have to say, almost every day, in some material that I read in the course of preparing for that day, somebody got canceled for saying something very basic. This morning, I saw a story about a young man studying in an education department in a secular school, and had tweeted out, "A man is a man and a woman is a woman," and they suspended him from his education graduate work because that's not an acceptable thing to say. That seems insane. I don't know how else to say it, but that seems insane.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion about sex and gender. So we know what sex is. Sex is determined by biology, and there are two sexes. Even though you'll hear out in the public, no, sex really is a spectrum, or there are more than two sexes. And what confuses that issue is the fact that sometimes, in rare cases, you will have someone born with an ambiguity in their genitalia or some disorder that's manifested through their hormones or a problem with their chromosomes, where it may be ambiguous at birth. But that doesn't mean they're not male or female. They're just as male as female by design as any of the rest of us. It's just something went wrong in that development, and it may take a little while to figure out, what their body is really oriented towards. There are only two sexes, male or female. But in the late 50s and early 60s, this idea of gender as being sort of a social construct and capturing something about our social roles came into play. And people got used to using the word gender when they really meant male or female, or they meant sexual difference. And then through academia over the past 30 years, this idea of gender as being detached and separate from sex has undergone it's tremendous theorizing. But now the idea is your gender is determined by how you feel, your identity, your self-perception. In other words, it's a completely subjective measure. So you've got half the population that is still using gender to mean male or female, when we should just say sex. My sex is male, my sex is female, not gender, because gender has been captured by those who have redefined it from the original discussions. And now it means anything. It means whatever you identify as.
Is the thing is, though, it's striking to me that this is presented as fact where there's no science that would say this. There's not a scientist who said, "Oh, we finally discovered, that there's a difference between gender and sex, and you might be a woman by sex, but a man by gender." It's just a thing that people made up.
Right. Well, that's especially important to realize, since science, starting in the 70s and 80s, actually started making better distinctions about sex. So, for example, you had sex-based medicine come into play, where people realized that women's bodies are different from men's. And so science improved because it started paying attention to that difference. And yet at the same time, on the level of cultural discourse, we have this idea that, no, the word gender is self-identification, and you will get canceled if you deny the identity that someone else is asserting. So, for example, one of the trigger things on the internet is if you say males can never be women, because there are those activists and academicians and people on the left who will say trans women, in other words, a male who identifies as a woman, is a woman just because he identifies that way.
Right.
And
it's like you all have to go along.
People, but there's
Well, I was thinking
and there's nothing different about that person's body. In other words, someone who identifies as female, he has a male body. Even if he alters it by surgery or hormones, if he died tomorrow and you exhumed his body a year later, scientists would look at it and say, this guy's a male.
Yeah.
So you cannot change sex. It's all in the subjective perception and identification.
And certain things that I had taken to be respectful, like a Catholic World Report reported that Rachel Levine, who works for the Biden administration, was, and the way they expressed this was a biological man who identifies as a woman. That seemed to me a respectful way of describing this. And they were banned from Twitter for saying that. What is that
Right.
about?
Well, it's about trying to cancel any idea that doesn't go along with the progressive orthodoxy. So our new president at the Ethics and Public Policy Center is Ryan Anderson. He wrote a well-regarded book that came out about 2 years ago
Right.
called When Harry Became Sally. Well, Amazon has now taken that off. It's out of its
You can't buy it.
book roster.
Yeah.
So you can't buy it.
No.
And they're canceling him because the idea is offensive. The idea that we're going to insist that there's a reality, there's a truth
Right.
to our bodies. And that means that our language needs to be connected to that truth. So once you deny the basic truth, you'll notice we see this corruption of language.
Our number again is 888-318-7884. We particularly want to talk about this from our perspective as Catholics. What does the church have to say about this? How might this create a challenge for Catholics? There are so many sides of this and things to get to. I almost don't know where to go, but I do want to let you know a couple things. One, if you are a Christian person who would like to know more about this and how this affects your faith and how you can think these things through, our guest Mary Rice Hasson has a website called personandidentity.com, personandidentity.com, and you can go there for some clear thinking about all of this, thinking that I hope that will be helpful to you. Again, our number here, 888-318-7884. We have to take a break. There are more things I want to ask you. There's about 1 million people on the line that want to ask you questions, but Ryan Anderson's book is not available on Amazon.com because it's unacceptable to them. I just want you to know that our producer, Darren, looked it up, and you can still buy Mein Kampf. So Mein Kampf is available, but When Harry Met Sally is not available. I'll leave you with that to contemplate while we take a break, and we'll come right back with Mary Rice Hasson.
Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Don't forget to check out the latest episode of our podcast, Catholic Answers Focus. You can listen each week to the world's premier podcast on Catholic apologetics at CatholicAnswersFocus.com or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Catholic Answers Focus, now available at CatholicAnswersFocus.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
EWTN is now on Twitter. Get short, timely messages from EWTN on your computer or cell phone. It's easy to stay up to date on a wide variety of topics. Pro-life news, Vatican announcements, catechesis, apologetics, the latest EWTN programming, and more. You can link to EWTN on Twitter from our homepage or go to twitter.com/EWTN. At work, at home, at school, and on the road. Stay connected to your world with EWTN's Twitter page.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. A vital issue in our time is how we are going to respond to the movement to redefine, or maybe define out of existence is a better way to say, manhood and womanhood. And this is a great conflict. It's going to continue to be a great intellectual battle in our society. Maybe for a long time to come. One never knows, however. Maybe that people will notice at a certain moment that the emperor has no clothes, and we won't find ourselves in that. As we do intellectual battle, however, for clear thinking, we can thank the Lord that we have people like Mary Rice Hasson, our guest this hour, the Cato Byrne Fellow in Catholic Studies at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, who has done a great deal of thinking. You know, I believe you're the founder, actually, of the Catholic Women's Forum. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Did this come? Did you become animated and interested in the transgender thing in part out of a defense of women and womanhood? Because it really seems like it's horrifying what's happening, for example, to women athletes who are, essentially being excluded from their own sports because they can't compete with biological males who are presenting themselves as women. Is that kind of where this grabbed your interest?
Yeah, you know what? I got a grant to study it about 6 years ago, and because it was just an area I was interested in. But we held a symposium, the Catholic Women's Forum held a symposium on gender ideology in response to some of Pope Francis's comments warning about gender ideology, just like Pope Benedict was also very concerned about this. And so there was a woman in from the Vatican, the Women's Office, who came over and gave a talk as part of that. And it was after that we put together our team to work on this, because we could see that the church needed to have a coordinated response in terms of collecting resources, writing about this. But to your question about how this is affecting women, absolutely. Women have the most to lose. For example, if the Equality Act passes, or under state laws that put into place the idea of gender identity as being this category that trumps every other category. It trumps sex. And what that means is that if you're a woman and you're hospitalized, and you have a roommate, usually men and women are separated. Well, under this, if you have a male who identifies as a woman, he's got a right under these laws to be put into the women's ward or women's floor. So you could have a man sharing that room with you, someone who's a biological man. If you have a daughter who's going in for her first exam, GYN exam, and usually you have a chaperone in there with a doctor and things like that, and you ask for a woman. Well, if there's a man working in the office who identifies as a transgender woman, you can't say, not you. And the same thing, women's prisons. There are people who are incarcerated, and yet all of a sudden you can have a man who is your cellmate because he identifies as a woman, or at least he's demanding that. So this ripples throughout society. Women need to think, any place where you want privacy or you want safety, how about a rape survivors support group? That's usually for women for a reason. And yet you can have a man who identifies as a woman who says he wants to be part of that group. So this whole thing threatens women and not only denies who we are, because you're eliminating the significance of sex, male or female, but it really puts women in circumstances where our safety and privacy is going to be compromised.
I hadn't thought, when you start thinking through, the logical consequences are unbelievable. Among the consequences is just raising generations of confused young people. And I don't know if I'm alone in this, but it seems to me like adolescence is hard enough, trying to figure out your sexuality and how to be an adult, and a sexual creature as God made you. It doesn't seem to me this is helping at all.
Yeah, and you put your finger on something. Adolescents in particular, we're seeing a spike, a rise in the number of adolescents who are identifying as transgender or non-binary, and disproportionately they are girls. Now, anyone who's a female remembers back to puberty. It is a tough time. You're dealing with your own body changing, but all of a sudden different kinds of attention that may not be welcome, confusion about your feelings, and anyone who's got other struggles as well. This transgender idea, this idea that you don't fit in, you don't feel comfortable with your body, well, now there's a solution for that. You must really be trans. And that's one of the problems with what's happening in schools, because many of the young people I've talked to or their parents who've been exposed to this and sort of started down the transgender road, many of them first learned about this in school. Then they go to the internet and they see all these YouTube videos and all this information that tells them that the source of their unhappiness, the source of their discomfort with their body is that they really must be a boy and that they really are transgender. And it becomes the solution that kids who are hurting grasp onto because it promises a healing. And yet it doesn't do that at all.
Are we looking at a future in which children will be chemically altered and physically mutilated?
Oh, that's happening already. God. So what happens, especially with, if you have a young child who is prepubertal, nobody is going to put that child on drugs, at least not yet. But the current thinking in the psychological community and that's been accepted by the American Academy of Pediatrics is that if you have a confused child you should allow them to dress as the opposite sex. You should affirm them by calling them whatever name they choose. So you're inducing psychological confusion because you're affirming them as someone they're not. But then when they get close to puberty, a child who has been living out this sort of fantasy that a girl is really a boy or a boy is really a girl, they're going to face this prospect of their body changing. And so that's when the gender docs step in and they say, aha, we have a solution for that too. We'll put your child on puberty blockers. In other words, we'll arrest their development, the development of their bodies, which also affects bone growth and other things, their executive functioning. But we're going to put them on these puberty blockers because if they're really trans, then it's easier to manipulate their body down the road. And what we found is that almost 98% of those kids who start on puberty blockers go on to cross-sex hormones. And if you have a child who started on puberty blockers and then is on cross-sex hormones, that child is sterile because their sexual organs have never developed. And then when you introduce the opposite sex hormones, it compromises their fertility. So you're seeing decisions made when a child is pre-puberty that are going to have ramifications for the rest of their lives. And, some people, kind of activists on the other side or people who are pushing this through the culture say it's a myth that children are going to be operated on, things like that. And I can tell you for sure it's not, because there is an observational study going on right now funded by NIH. And the reports in that, the study reports, report mastectomies on girls as young as 13. In other words, a girl who feels uncomfortable, she's put on puberty blockers, and then she starts cross-sex hormones. Well, her discomfort with her breasts is going to increase because she's trying to convince herself she's a boy. And so there's this push then for this unhappy teenager to solve her problems by referring her for a double mastectomy. And we know that's happening, and we know genital surgery is happening on boys who are 16 and 17. I mean, this is just barbaric.
It's child abuse is what it is. It's just child abuse. And the fact that I suppose a society that will kill its children will eventually decide it's going to abuse its children as well. Our guest is Mary Rice Hasson. She's much more articulate, and I'll be frank with you, more patient than I am. So I'm going to let the callers speak with Mary. It's really horrifying. I feel viscerally horrified by what you're saying is being done to minors. People who, they can't even get a driver's license.
Exactly. There are all sorts of things that we realize they do not have the maturity or judgment to choose and choose prudently, no matter what their feelings are. And yet parents are getting bullied if they don't affirm their children and going down that path, because parents are told your child is going to commit suicide if they do this, because children who experience these things do have higher rates of mental illness. They have higher rates of what's called suicidal ideation. But this is not the solution. The solution is to deal with the underlying issues, because when you look at the longitudinal research, the suicide rate remains high, even after people go through all of these transitions. So that's not the cure.
Let's go to Noah in Westmont, Illinois, as our first caller. Noah, delighted to have you here with us. Thank you very much for your call. Please go ahead with your question for our guest, Mary Rice Hasson.
Hi, thank you guys so much for having me on. I'm really, really appreciative of you guys doing a talk like this. I know it's really controversial, but really, really important, and I'm so glad to have you guys as a resource. I've been listening to you guys for a long time now. I just really appreciate all the work you're doing with this area. And so my question is from a family member who is very pro-LGBT, and she uses the phrase gender is a social construct a lot. I was glad to hear you mention that earlier. And her reasoning is basically that we have all of this psychological research about like gender ideology and like the social, barriers in place or the social influences that lead people to think they're a certain gender. And it's like she's pointing to like the idea that it's all in your head. And then, there's the evidence that we have from like people who are born with ambiguous genitalia that she's pointing to defend that statement. And I'm wondering, like, in light of all that, and then just also in general, like, when you hear someone who says gender is a social construct, how should Christians respond to that?
Thank you, Noah.
Yeah. So good question. One, a couple of things. Just from the start, when people raise the intersex question, just realize that's a red herring. because people who are identifying as transgender or non-binary or something like that, there's nothing wrong with their bodies. Their bodies are perfectly healthy and whole. It's just there's a problem in terms of their self-perception. But the reason why people raise the intersex issue is because they want to prove that there are some people out there who have a disconnect between body and mind. But that's a different problem because they're starting with a physical difficulty. And we'll get back to the rest of your question when we're done.
Mary Rice Hanson, a good host for the show as well as guest. I guess you heard the music. Noah, a lot more to say about that, I am sure. Thank you for that question. Again, Mary Rice Hanson, our guest. Our number, 888-318-7884. Whether you agree with us or disagree with us, whether you're Catholic or not, you're welcome to call.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, is one of the most courageous leaders in the church, known for his outspoken support of unborn life, Orthodox faith and morals, and reforming Catholic institutions. In his groundbreaking new book, Light and Leaven, he offers a forthright perspective on the state of the church today and calls on the lay faithful to meet its challenges boldly, touching on topics including parish renewal, the centrality of the Eucharist, the need for prayer and silence in a noisy and distracted age, and the battle between good and evil in the church and world. Bishop Strickland's wise insights and evident love for souls will inspire and edify you. To order your copy of Light and Leaven, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. So happy to be back with you as we start another week. And in the second hour, Carlo's going to be here, and we're going to talk about the Bible blueprint for the church. Does the Bible really have evidence that Jesus intended to found a church? Is it possible that church still exists? That's what we're going to cover next hour. This hour, covering maybe the most important issue of our moment with one of the folks who can really, really speak about it. Mary Rice Hanson is our guest. She is the founder, as a matter of fact, of the Catholic Women's Forum, and she's got a website you can visit called personandidentity.com if you'd like to get some clear thinking that is consonant with the teachings of the Catholic Church and with reality in general. Those two things never being in conflict, by the way. You're welcome to check that out, Person and Identity, or you're welcome to call us, 888-318-7884. On the line, we have Noah, and Noah is in Westmont, Illinois, with kind of a two-part question. The first part being that our guest, Mary Rice Hanson, addressed, having to do with intersex people. And you were saying, Mary, that that's essentially a red herring. That's a different thing than a person who's got a perfectly healthy body saying, well, I'm just a different kind of person. But he also wanted to know about just this general claim that people make, gender is a social construct. With lots of people seem to think this is the height of wisdom to say this. How do we respond as Catholics to that?
Well, it's a little bit tricky because gender was conceived to distinguish from bodily sex. So Dr. John Money was the psychologist in the 1950s who pioneered the phrase gender role. And he worked mostly with people who had disorders of sexual development, intersex, or who were transsexuals. So he was experienced dealing with people who had this dichotomy. And so he came up with the idea of gender roles being determinative of who you are, that's what mattered, how you live it out in society. And from there, this whole thing took off in terms of academia and things, but feminism took that word gender and that idea that biology is not determinative and used gender, insisted on gender being used to refer to women in order to detach women from being hemmed in by sex stereotypes. And so most of us, certainly when I grew up, you grew up using the word gender because it was also in the middle of the sexual revolution or on the heels of it, and people were careful about how they talked about sex and sexuality. But we have to remember, the truth is that sex is the word we want to use when we're talking about male and female, because since the 70s, this idea of gender has been taken over by the academics and the radicals and now the progressive politicians and the activists, and it has become used to refer simply to your identity as a social construct, completely separate from your sex. The church has only used gender in a couple of places. And the first was when it was responding in a UN document, pushing back on the idea that there were more than two genders, because gender at that time, again, was being used as a euphemism for male or female. So the church was insistent, no, that when we talk about that, we mean the customary view that it means male or female. And then you saw in the document that came out, I think it was last year, male and female, he created them by the education department in the Vatican. And they used the word gender and connected it to sex. But here's the thing, if we use the word gender, we're on their turf, because they're the ones who created it. They're the ones who defined it and redefined it. So if we insist on trying to connect gender to sex because that was what we were used to, we're going to lose, because it's redefined now in law. It has nothing to do with sex. In fact, oftentimes, like in the Equality Act, where it talks about gender identity, it says regardless of sex. And that's the typical phrasing. In other words, your perception is completely separate from the bodily reality of who you are. So as Catholics, we have to retool. It doesn't make sense to fight that battle of whether gender, that word, is a social construct. What we want to talk about is your body is real, you're male or female, your identity is as a son or daughter of the Lord. That does not change. There are cultural aspects of living that out, your masculinity, your femininity, and those things can vary from culture to culture, but your fundamental identity is not something that is built by society, that is dependent on cultural stereotypes. And that's what they mean by a social construct, that socially it's determined, there's nothing innate, and yet sex is innate.
Noah, thanks.
So I hope that clarifies a little bit. That's kind of a long...
Well, we got a lot of folks on the line, and I do want to get to more. So I'll speak for Noah. That was perfectly clear and very helpful. Thank you. As you're speaking, though, I realized you said something earlier that I wanted to get back to, and then I will go to the next caller. But Pope Francis actually has been very his papacy has been marked by a desire, often expressed, to dialogue with the modern world, to be in dialogue with the modern world. And on this issue, it's not a matter of dialogue. He's really forceful. And I just wanted to get your impression of what Pope Francis has said about transgenderism.
I think he's sending two messages. So one is the example that he's given in terms of reaching out to people who identify in this way and treating them kindly, taking care of their needs. So, for example, I think it was last year where he sent some money over to a home that was assisting women who identified as men but who were prostituting themselves. So he cared for them. And I think that's got to be our disposition. Everyone has dignity, and we need to have compassion and care for others. And yet Pope Francis, the same person who's reaching out in compassion is insistent. We are male or female, and we cannot deny that sexual difference. And he calls it a war, gender ideology, a war on marriage and family. And he warns about the effort of wealthy countries to push this idea on developing nations as a condition for foreign aid. And frankly, we're going to see that under this administration.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification, because it helps, I think, because there is an increasing, like everything, the Catholic Church is polarized between right and left. And this is one of those things that's actually not that polarizing if people will just listen to the Pope and, if people want to have that consistent Catholic view. Up next, John in Antioch, Illinois. John, thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for our guest, Mary Rice Hasson.
Hey guys, God bless. This is a very controversial topic. And I guess my question is mainly why? There's so much controversy about this, and there's so much debate, and it seems that everyone's missing the mark. We're missing the point of Jesus. And to harp on whether someone's living right or not, to me, as a Christian and pro-LGBTQ, it seems that, we're turning away so many people that could be saved by God's grace, mercy, and Jesus' love. And it's sad because, Jesus came here to save everyone. And when we debate stuff like this and say one side's right and another's wrong, to me, and I feel like to a lot of people, it makes it seem like not everyone can be saved.
Okay,
and,
John, I'm gonna let Mary respond to that, because I do want to have a little bit of dialogue between the two of you, if we could. So, Mary,
Sure.
How do you respond to what John had to say?
I think first you're honing in on something really important, that every person has dignity. Every person is loved by God and should be loved by the rest of us. And that's true, and we can agree on that. But I disagree where you say, why are we even worrying about all this stuff? And here's why we worry about it. Because these concepts, this idea of the person as not being male or female, it's a completely different anthropology, understanding of who we are. And it's being forced upon us, on our children, through the law and through our educational systems, through the medical system. And so it is important to have these discussions and to push back on laws that are going to enforce this vision of the person, which is contradictory to, all of human history. So these things have consequences. It's not, and to your point about, shouldn't people feel welcome and things? Sure, people are welcome, but we all show up at church broken, and we're all in need of healing. But healing's only possible when you acknowledge your brokenness. And so there's a distortion and a brokenness when someone identifies in a way that involves rejecting the body God has given them. So that's a brokenness in need of healing. But it's not something that we just sort of pretend isn't broken, because you can't find healing until you acknowledge the wound that is there.
John, I wonder what you think.
I feel like the wound in what's broken is that ideology that someone's broken because they feel in their heart that something is wrong, or that, society is putting on a too much pressure. I don't know why humans think that God created somebody and God was wrong by making them transgender. I feel like my main question would be for you is that if your son or daughter came out transgender and that was their truth, and God told them that was their truth, would you reject them?
Okay, Mary?
No, first of all, yeah. First of all, you've built in a couple of premises that are problematic. One, you don't reject anyone. You love your person, every person who's experiencing whatever difficulty. So that's a false dichotomy to say that you have to reject the person. But as a mom of 7, my kids have come to me with all sorts of things where they needed correction, or they needed guidance, or they needed accompaniment to walk down a path that is healthy and whole and pleasing to God. And so it's not that we're saying God made you wrong. Quite to the contrary. God created you male or female. Because someone's feelings or their insistent desire goes in a different direction doesn't mean that God created them that way any more than any of our desires that would lead us away from the truth about who we are. Our desires sent from God. Desires can come from all sorts of places that aren't necessarily our fault. It could be our experience, our upbringing, it could be abuse from other people. So feelings don't define reality, which was another phrase you used, was that's their truth. Well, truth is objective. That may be what they feel, and I'm not going to deny what they feel. But sometimes you feel things that are out of order with the truth about reality. And the truth is we're born male or female. And when you say to someone whose feelings go in a different direction, in other words, they're rejecting their body, they're identifying in a different way, if you affirm that, what you're saying is it is normal and healthy and good to be at war with your body, to reject your body. So you're encouraging and affirming this split sense, this sense of constant contradiction between those feelings of identity in your body. And it doesn't go away just because someone sort of feels affirmed. There's a continual need for that affirmation and it's just not true. So, true compassion and true love walks with someone from where they are, but leads them into the light, leads them to the truth, and all the way encourages them to understand God loves them at every step in that journey. So it's not a question of being loved or hated by God, whether we're perfect in virtue or sinners. We're all sinners, but rather looking for the truth that he's revealed, and our body is part of that truth that he's revealed.
John, we have to take a break. I'm very glad that you were able to get through and have this dialogue with Mary Rice Hasson. Well, I hope you'll feel welcome to call again anytime. 888-318-7884 is our number. We're talking about transgenderism with Mary Rice Hasson. And I want to give out the website again that Mary and others have created, personandidentity.com, where you can explore more about a Catholic response, a Catholic Christian response to the increasing pressure for a transgendered world. 888-318-7884, our number. Personandidentity.com is the website. Right back with more Mary Rice Hasson and your calls right after this.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
I just want to share that 5 years ago, my lovely warrior princess and saint of a wife and I decided to adopt a little girl through foster care. She is the perfect roundout of our family of 3 boys and her. Yes, there are challenges. Very grateful today for all the blessings that he has shown our family.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. We're starting off the week with a tough one. We're talking about transgenderism with our guest, Mary Rice Hasson. Mary Rice Hasson is, as she said, a mother of 7, but also is the Kate O'Byrne Fellow in Catholic Studies at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C., and the founder of the Catholic Women's Forum. She's also got a website you should check out, personandidentity.com, to help you think through these issues, personandidentity.com. Up next to speak with Mary is Bethany in Ohio, listening on St. Gabriel Radio. Bethany, we're delighted to have you. Go ahead with your question for Mary Rice Hasson.
Okay. Well, first, I just want to tell you guys, this is an answer to prayer. I was screaming out to God last night just to help me because we just got into an issue last night with my kid telling me that I'm transphobic and that I obviously hate her, and So I've just been like, Lord, please, what do I do? And when I saw this was the topic today, I'm like, oh, thank you, Jesus. So thank you very much for taking my question.
Well, thank you, Bethany.
So I kind of have two parts to the question. The first is my daughter, she's about to turn 18, so we're already in a tough time. And she has autism and post-traumatic stress disorder, that's the complex kind, along with other issues, severe depression, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts. It's been really, really hard. Part of her autism is that she mirrors behaviors, and so she's, come across different things that her friends have said they had, and she kind of, takes on those types of behaviors. And around like 15 or 16, she started kind of being around people who were saying they were trans. When she was 16, one of her hospitalizations, I went in to go like visit her. She was in the psychiatric unit, and I, was saying, my daughter's in here, and he said, oh yeah, he'll be right out. And I'm like, what? I'm talking about my daughter, and he said he. And so this has actually become an issue now with her therapist and the whole Children's Hospital Behavioral Health Unit.
Yep.
They have changed her name in her chart to her new preferred name, and I gave her the most beautiful name. After my grandmother's, it's the most beautiful name, and she's rejected it. And they changed her name in her legal medical chart. And she's not even 18 yet. They started doing this when she was like just turned 17. They changed it all in her chart, and her therapist will call her by her preferred name. And I tried to be understanding of that because I'm like, okay, they're trying to build a rapport. They don't want her to reject talking to them. Like she's, in crisis, so we want to keep her feeling close and trusting. But this is just reinforced in every way. All these, her psychiatrists, all these therapists, and we have tons of different therapists because she's just we've got a team, and everybody on the team, and anytime she's had to go into the hospital, it's just reinforced, and I don't know how to tell them, and I've tried to change it back in her chart, and then they change it back again, and I'm like, do I not have any rights as their parent? And now she's about to turn 18, so on top of trying to figure out how do I address this with the medical, with her medical team, how do I get any type of support there? Now I'm scared that the moment she turns 18, she's going to run, and never look back. And I don't know how, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to keep her in my home.
Yeah.
Bethany, hang on a quick sec, because I want to let Mary Rice Hasson talk with you, and then we'll let you continue talking with Mary. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah. First of all, my heart goes out to you, and I have spoken with many parents in your shoes. So let me just give you a little bit of hope that the Lord is with you, and the Lord loves your daughter even more than you do. And so don't despair. However, there are some certain things to realize, certain things that you said. Number one, that she's autistic or on the autism spectrum. These kids are more vulnerable than other kids to this transgender delusion, really, this idea. And there's a much higher percentage of children or teens who identify as transgender who are autistic or who have mental health struggles. So she sort of fits that classic profile. I would encourage you to read a book called Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier, where she interviewed a whole bunch of families very similar towards yours. The other thing I'd encourage is there's a group called Parents of ROGD Kids, parents just like you, who have gone through the same circumstance and find themselves at war with the medical community. You need support, you need encouragement to hang in there, to love your daughter, but to remain fixed upon the truth. If you have the ability, I would shift her from those doctors in a heartbeat, because unfortunately, there are certain segments of the medical community that have bought into this idea, and they call it gender affirming therapy. And they will stop asking questions about underlying hurts and underlying wounds, or why she might be feeling this way. Why is it so important to reject her body, et cetera? And they simply say, she identifies as trans. That's it. That's the answer. We're affirming that. And they go with it, and it makes things worse because those underlying things do not get healed. So just in terms of sort of quick response, those are a couple of things I'd suggest to you. But it is worrisome. And you can look on our website too, personidentity.com. We have a lot of resources there. You have to educate yourself, let your daughter know that you love her, but try to do whatever you can to forestall her being put on hormones and shunted down that road, because it's a tragic one.
Bethany, your response to our guest, Mary Rice Hasson.
Well, first off, you said parents of ROGD kids. Is that what you said for the support group?
Yes, it's on our website too. If you go to personandidentity.com, there's a parent section, and in there are resources and things. So parents of ROGD kids. And because there's a phenomenon, the ROGD is rapid onset gender dysphoria. In other words, it's kids who never had a problem with their identity. They had other issues. And then they get it from the peers, from their schools, from the internet, and sort of fixate on this as the solution.
Okay. Now, and I have one other question.
Go ahead.
One other thing, and this is what came up last night, and she's kind of talked about this lately, but last night it was a whole big blow up. She's asking me for her insurance information, and she's saying, "Well, I'm about to be 18, so I want to take charge." And I said, "Are you trying to get testosterone?" And she is, and I don't know, once she does turn 18, what can I do? Like, I don't know. I don't.
Unfortunately,
I don't know what to do.
Yeah. So hold on. Just like I said, your daughter needs to know you love her, and it's important to raise the doubts about the physical or the wisdom of these physical transitions just simply on the medical basis alone, because oftentimes what these kids are hearing from other sources, whether it's the internet or sometimes the medical professionals, is that your parents don't understand, your parents just don't want you to, quote, be trans, and there's a wedge that people try to put in between. But you as her mom love her, and you can express that concern for her body and her physical welfare and say, here's why I was reading about this. This is a real concern. And so that's one thing, but I would not give her the insurance information. Unfortunately, the way the insurance companies run is, number one, they will cover this stuff. Number two, they will not let you have knowledge of what they're doing, because many, especially the children's hospitals, they have dual systems of information where they will keep sensitive information away from the parents. And that's a huge problem. But if you can find a different therapist, I would switch her, because a gender-affirming therapist has one goal in mind for your daughter, and that's to push her down this road. And Bethany, it doesn't mean there's no hope, because there are people who are detransitioners. In other words, they go through this for a few years, sometimes take testosterone, some of them even have surgeries, and they come out on the other end and they realize they still have all the problems they had, that this transition thing was not the answer. But at any rate, you need the support of other parents who've been through this. But I would encourage you, while you still have some leverage, to see if you can find a different therapist who is not, quote, a gender-affirming therapist.
Bethany?
Okay.
Bethany,
thank
go ahead.
you so much. I
welcome.
mean, just one thing. I do always tell her that there is nothing in this world that she could do that would make me stop loving her. And I do tell her that, God loves her and Christ loves her no matter what.
Bethany, I just want to let you know, I think your expression of your own pain as a mother has been extremely moving to everybody, and gives us a sense of the stakes of what's on the line here. You as a mother being treated that way is abusive, and you never should have been treated that way, nor should your daughter have. Your voice is a heroic voice. In addition to what Mary has said, I want to suggest to you that you consecrate your daughter to the Virgin Mary, who loves her and will take care of her and will be there to assist you. Bethany, I hope you'll call again. I hope you'll stay in touch. Our guest is Mary Rice Hasson.
I'll pray for you.
Yeah, we'll all pray for you. There's many people praying for you and for other parents like you who are going through similar things. Mary Rice Hasson, say again the website and where people can find out more about you, would you please?
Yeah. Sure. So the Person and Identity Project is personandidentity.com. You'll find information there for Catholics and Catholic institutions, Christians as well. Anything about this whole transgender issue that you want to know.
Mary Rice Hassan, I hope you'll be on many more times. Now, especially now that we've got your audio straightened out. We messed you up a little bit last time you were on, but you are a wonderful guest, and I really believe that your work is heroic as well. And I hope that we can continue to be supportive of your work. God bless you.
Thank you.
Coming up next, Carla
Thank you
Broussard,
very much.
we're going to talk about the Bible blueprint for the church. Yeah, it's in there. There's a lot about the church in the Bible, and we're going to dig into that right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live on this really very fine Monday afternoon or early evening, depending on where you are. Or maybe I always say it like that, but a lot of people listen in the morning as well. Like right now, it's morning in Singapore, where we have lots of listeners.
There you go.
Or Australia. In any case, he's back, Carlo Broussard. We wore him out on Friday doing the game show, and he's back.
I am back.
Welcome
Thanks
back, Carlo.
be to God. It's always great to be in the saddle here in the studio.
Yeah.
Catholic Answers.
Well, thank you for doing it. Carlo's the author of 3 books. He's an apologist here at Catholic Answers, of an extraordinary speaker, and the author of 3 books, Prepare the Way, Overcoming Obstacles to God, the Gospel, and the Church, which will be of some relevance today. Then Meeting the Protestant Challenge, How to Answer 50 Biblical Objections to Catholic Beliefs. And then the new one, Purgatory is for Real, good news about the afterlife for those who aren't perfect yet. Today we're going to talk about the church. You often do these Bible Blueprint shows with us.
Yeah, sure.
And when you say the Bible Blueprint for the church, you mean the Catholic Church?
Well, the Bible blueprint for the church that Jesus established. And whenever we look at that blueprint and what Jesus intended the church to have, and we look at the Catholic Church today, it maps on perfectly. And gives reason for the conclusion that the Catholic Church today is the original Christian franchise, the original church established by Jesus Christ. And so we look at certain characteristics of that church established by Jesus. That there is an invisible communion by grace, we affirm, and that is present in the New Testament. But there's also a visible dimension to the church established by Jesus Christ, identifiable in the hierarchical rank of citizens within that kingdom Jesus came to establish, namely the church. That there are believers, all of the citizens who become members of the kingdom of Christ by way of faith and the grace of God. But within that kingdom, within that church, there's also a body of constituted officials, leaders, shepherds to oversee, to govern the people of God, and to exercise a certain rank of authority over and above other citizens within the kingdom. That body of constituted officials initially is identifiable in the apostles, and even within that rank of that body of constituted officials, you have a particular individual whom Jesus appoints to be the visible principle and source of unity for that body of officials, as well as for the universal church that Jesus establishes here on earth. So we see a visible dimension in the hierarchical rank of the church. So we affirm as Catholics both dimensions, the invisible and the visible. But what's relevant for our conversations, in particular with our Protestant brothers and sisters, is the visible dimension. So some will outright deny that there is any visible aspect of to the church in the New Testament and after the New Testament age throughout all generations. Some Protestants will affirm a visible hierarchical dimension in the church within the first century, but then deny that as an essential aspect of the church that continues to be a part of the church after the age of the apostles. Yeah. So with the death of the last apostle, that hierarchy is no longer present. There are no other individuals who have the authority to oversee, to govern the Church of God here on earth like the apostles had. No sort of apostolic succession or a transmitting of authority. And so depending on who we're talking to in conversation, that will determine what sort of approach we take in trying to defend the Catholic understanding of Jesus' church as having this visible dimension, both for the first century church and for his church throughout all generations until the end of the world. For we profess that that hierarchical visible dimension is essential to the church and not something that would cease to exist with the death of the last apostle, but would continue on. And that hierarchical rank of authority involves judicial authority, being able to make make decisions on how to govern the Christian, how to govern Christians in their lives and settling disputes and making disciplinary precepts and binding and loosing in a judicial way. But this rank of authority that we find in the apostles, and I would argue in the men that they ordained, their successors, namely the bishops, a doctrinal authority to proclaim the truth of Jesus Christ, protected by the Holy Spirit, to guide and lead the people of God in the truth, protect them in the truth, expound that truth for the people of God to understand throughout all generations. So you have a judicial authority and a doctrinal authority. And part of that biblical blueprint for the church established by Jesus involves both aspects of authority, judicial and doctrinal. And so that's sort of a sketch of the biblical blueprint there.
888-318-7884. You're welcome to call whether you're Catholic or not. Maybe you're a Catholic who'd like some help explaining the biblical blueprint for the church. Or perhaps you're a Protestant person who'd like to challenge us on our understanding of what it is that Jesus founded. 888-318-7884. It does seem to me that among Protestants today, there is, and some of this is, I think, is connected to the internet with certain popular internet videos. There's more and more of this, I don't believe in organized religion, or I believe in what Jesus teaches, but I don't need a church for that. I don't need a religion for that. As a matter of fact, I think there was a famous video a little while ago that was like, I don't believe in religion, I believe in Jesus.
Right.
So how do we respond to that challenge?
Well, if you're going to say you don't believe in religion or organized religion because you believe in Jesus, well, that assumes that you believe that Jesus didn't establish an organized religion.
Yeah.
So we could challenge that assumption and say, no, we do have evidence that Jesus established a church with a hierarchy or a rank of authority, a visible aspect where you have organization identified in the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, well, then you ought to believe in the organized religion because you believe in Jesus. So the real question is, did Jesus structure his church in such a way that you have a body of constituted officials to oversee the people of God, to guide them, to instruct them, and even to sanctify them through the sacraments we would profess as Catholics? And so it really all gets down to that question of how did Jesus set his church up? Now, those who make that claim, I believe in Jesus, not organized religion, often what's going on is they have this preconceived notion that organized religion is somehow going to take away from Jesus. If the human members of the organized religion were left to themselves and did not have the Holy Spirit to guide and lead them into all truth, then they eventually would end up leading us away from Jesus.
Right,
because man left to himself will mess up. They're going to mess things up.
Yeah.
But given the promise of Christ that the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against his church, and that he promises the Holy Spirit to guide and lead his apostles into all truth about who he is and what he taught, we have the divine promise that these constituted officials within the Church of Jesus Christ will not lead us away from Jesus, but the whole point is for them to help us grow in intimacy with Jesus, to know who he is so that we can love him more, and to know what he revealed so that we can love him more. Because the more we know, the more reasons we have to love him. So the whole purpose of the organized religion is for the sake of fostering intimacy with Jesus, helping us get the clear picture of Jesus so that we're not tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine, as St. Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11. The whole purpose of apostles, prophets, teachers, evangelists is so that we can be unified in the faith and not tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine. That's the point of the organized religion, not to take us away from Jesus, but to lead us to Jesus. And thanks be to God, we have the Holy Spirit to help the church out to do that.
Carlo Broussard is our guest. Our number is 888-318-7884. If you disagree with us, we love disagreeing callers. You're welcome to call. And I particularly love disagreeing callers because Carlo's the one that has to answer the questions. I don't have to do it. 888-318-7884. Right back with your calls and more on the Bible Blueprint for the church right after this.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Don't forget to check out the latest episode of our podcast, Catholic Answers Focus. You can listen each week to the world's premier podcast on Catholic apologetics at CatholicAnswersFocus.com or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Catholic Answers Focus, now available at CatholicAnswersFocus.com.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
There is tremendous power in prayer because when we acknowledge that we don't have the power, but God does, things then begin to move for our good. Remember Matthew 19:26. But Jesus looked at them and said to them, with men, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Now that's power.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I get excited on a Monday, and then I forget to read the ads. I get all going, and I forget I'm supposed to read the ads. Nick, long version or short version of the ads today? What do you want? Short version? All right, you got it. Catholic Answers School of Apologetics. They got a sale going on over there. You just go to School of Apologetics, and you're going to get $50 off the courses over at School of Apologetics. $50 off? Are you kidding me? Visit schoolofapologetics.com today and take one of those apologetics courses. I'm going to do another one that's short. Short or long on this one? All right, all short for now. All right, free ebook over at shop.catholic.com. That's the shortest I can do it. There's a free ebook at shop.catholic.com. I literally cannot do the ad any shorter than that. 888-318-7884 is our number. Carlo Broussard is our guest. He's an apologist here at Catholic Answers and the author of, now look at this stack of books he's got. He's also a very, very fine speaker. And I just realized I'm in the 13th minute of this hour and I haven't called him the Cajun uncaging the truth yet. I think all the way to now. Your calls are welcome as we discuss the Bible blueprint for the church. 888-318-7884. Carlo, I mean, the sense that let me put it this way. If a Protestant person were to call you up and say, I don't want to talk about what all this tradition stuff. Let's just look at the Bible, Carlo. Could you make an argument for the church just from the Bible?
Yes, because we can look at it as historical documents first and foremost. And we look at it through the historical lens, and it's a matter of historicity. It's a historical fact that Jesus established this community of believers, and within that community of believers, certain believers having a higher rank of authority over others, and tracing the historical lineage from those leaders, namely the apostles and their successors, the immediate successors like Timothy and Titus succeeding Paul as bishops, and those bishops succeeding them as Clement of Rome would write about in the late first century in his letter to the Corinthian church, talking about how bishops were successors to the apostles, and those bishops ordaining other men and having this valid succession from the early apostles all the way to the present-day bishops, and those bishops being in union with the successor to St. Peter, the Bishop of Rome, and that being the identifying marker of which church is the original Christian franchise established by Jesus Christ. And from that historical basis, then we're able to see what Jesus invested this church with certain powers, made certain promises, and that would provide us reason to respond to the church in what she teaches about God's revelation, to embrace it with faith. And so we can look to the New Testament as historical evidence, and then look at historical evidence after the New Testament age as well. When you look at those two together, you see the continuity between what Jesus established in the first century and what continued to exist within the Christian church subsequent to the first century.
888-318-7884, the number. Shall we go to phones, Carlo?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, let's start with Sean in West Chicago, Illinois, watching on YouTube Live. Sean, go ahead with your question for Carlo.
Hi, thank you guys so much for taking my call.
Happy to.
So I'm part of the Anglican Church of North America, part of the broader Global Anglican Fellowship, and we heartily rejoice with you guys when we hear that the history of interpretation informs our understanding of 1 Timothy 2 and 1 Timothy 3 in support of a church hierarchy.
Okay.
I meant there. My question has to do with apostolic succession, namely whether you guys, as you guys see the history of the Anglican Communion and specifically the Anglican Church of North America, we lay a claim to apostolic succession, or a kind of apostolic succession.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you guys would see that claim within the Anglican Church of North America as valid.
So, Sean, just so the reader, I just want the listener who doesn't know exactly what apostolic succession is. We believe that the bishops of the church are successors of the apostles. You believe that the bishops of the Anglican Church of America are also successors to the apostles. Is that a fair way to put it?
Right.
Okay. So, Carlo,
Yeah.
how do we address that, Carlo?
Yeah, so the bottom line here, Sean, is it correct? Am I getting your name right? Okay. Is that from the Catholic perspective, Pope Leo XIII, in his bull Apostolicae Curiae, had declared Anglican orders to be invalid. And he declared them to be invalid for the reason that there was a defect of form and intention. So in other words, from the Catholic point of view, the ritual rites that are used for ordination for the Anglican clergy are lacking in that which would be required from the Catholic point of view and understanding for the minister to be ordained into the presbyterate. It's certain nuances and details within the form or the ritual being used that would not entail the full understanding of the presbyterate as we believe to be revealed within the New Testament. That full understanding involving, for example, the forgiveness of sins. That whenever one is ordained, one would be ordained to have the power to administer the forgiveness of sins in the name of Christ, for this, and also the powers of consecration for the Holy Eucharist. And so fundamentally what's going on is that from the Catholic perspective, we do not see the Anglican form of ordination as entailing the fullness of that which is necessary and essential for a valid ordination for an individual member to be admitted into the presbyterate to serve as priest. It comes close. The language involved talks about certain aspects that we could agree with, but there are certain nuanced details that we would disagree with over. So I would encourage you, Sean, to read Pope Leo XIII's bull Apostolicae Curiae. And then also, too, you might want to check out the 1998 motu proprio Ad Tuidem Fidem. And that I think that was from the Congregation for the Doctrine. Oh, it might have been from Pope St. John Paul II, I think it was. And he laid to rest the discussion of the validity of Anglican orders, reaffirming what Pope Leo XIII declared in Apostolicae Curiae, which was in 1896. So I would encourage you to read those two documents, and then also go to our website at Catholic.com, type in Anglican orders, and you'll find some resources there, brother, that will go into greater detail concerning the nuances that would invalidate the episcopal consecration or ordination for Anglican bishops and or priests, and which goes a little bit beyond what we can talk about here on the air. So hopefully that's helpful to you.
It just sounds so so close, but not quite there that you could say. But I mean, there are bishops outside of the Catholic Church who are validly ordained.
That is correct.
We don't deny that.
That is correct. We do acknowledge bishops outside the visible boundaries of the Catholic Church that are validly ordained, have valid apostolic succession because their ordinations are valid. And even what you'll find sometimes, I even know of a particular individual who's a friend of mine, and this particular individual was within the Anglican community and was validly ordained by a valid bishop. So like there was a valid bishop whom he went to validly ordain him.
I see.
He wasn't ordained with the rite that's used within Anglican orders, but he was ordained by this other bishop who had valid orders.
So he was in fact a priest.
So he is a valid priest. Of course, he doesn't have faculties to perform those powers. He's Catholic.
Yeah.
He converted to the Catholic faith, and he doesn't have the faculties to perform his priestly duties, but he is a valid priest. So that's an interesting little nuance as well, where sometimes you'll find, some Anglican priests may very well have valid orders if they were ordained just by not by chance, but by happenstance of going to some bishop who had valid orders.
And there's so many things that are beautiful about Anglicanism. I have learned about it in part because I don't know if you're aware of this, Carlo, but many Anglican priests and even bishops have come into the Catholic Church, and we have an ordinariate.
I attend one of the parishes.
Oh, I thought maybe you were aware of this. And it's a beautiful liturgy. I mean,
I love it. It's quite beautiful. Yeah, it's a good happy medium between the extraordinary form and the ordinary form.
Right, and it's and such beautiful use of the English language because, of course, it was the English Church for so long.
Yeah, you do have to get used to the these and the thous.
I don't have to get used to it. I love it right from the get-go. Sean, thanks very much for the call. We're doing the Bible blueprint for the church this hour with Carlo Broussard. If you don't agree with us about the visible church, that Christ, in fact, and our friend Sean that just called from Chicago does agree with us, that Christ, in fact, founded a church that has both visible and invisible aspects. If you're one who says, no, I don't think so, I don't believe in this apostolic succession, I don't believe in the priesthood, that kind of thing, you're welcome to call as well. And Carlo would love to talk with you about the Bible blueprint for those visible aspects of the church as well. 888-318-7884. Let's go to Bend, Oregon. Watching on YouTube Live is Bryce in Bend, Oregon. Bryce, go ahead with your question for Carlo Broussard.
Hey, Cy and Carlo. I'm sorry I called back a little too soon. I don't mean to bug you guys too much with my questions. But my question is on how the church interprets the Old Testament. Specifically, how does the church know what rules go from the Old Covenant into the New Covenant? And if a rule does come over, why wouldn't the punishment come along with it also?
Okay.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, so with regard to the first question concerning, which rules, well, first of all, let me just say this, Bryce. Thanks be to God for the living testimony of the magisterium, right? The living voice established by Christ on this earth to teach on Christ's behalf, namely the magisterium, to help guide us in this question, right? Because if left to our own, I could see very well that we might be a bit confused. In fact, the very first century Christians were confused with regard to how a man is to be saved. Some were arguing very fervently that people who were becoming Christian needed to be circumcised and continue to hold to the Old Testament precepts in order to be a true Christian. But thanks be to God, Bryce, we have the first century apostles and presbyters following the very instruction of Jesus that whenever you have a brother that sins against you, go and try to convince him. If he doesn't listen to you, take 2 or 3 witnesses. If you still can't convince him, take it to the church. And this is exactly what Paul and Barnabas did in Acts chapter 15, where they could not convince those quote-unquote Judaizers, those Jewish Christians who were saying the Gentile converts need to be circumcised and hold fast to the Mosaic precepts. So what did they do? They took it up to Jerusalem. And there was a council that was convened, namely with the apostles, that consisted of the apostles and the presbyters. And they made a judgment, I would argue, with Peter at the helm, to judge that it was by grace that the Gentiles were saved, not by circumcision. And they issued a decree and sent it out to all the local churches. And that decree also involves some disciplinary precepts as well. And so, Bryce, the bottom line here, brother, is that we have the church that declares for us, the magisterium of the church, that declares for us what is abrogated and what remains. We have the church to help us out in that. Now, we do have in the New Testament certain things from Jesus himself and even from St. Paul that helps us get started, right? So Jesus himself telling Peter, giving him the vision in Acts chapter 10, kill and eat, Peter, kill and eat, no, Lord, kill and eat, no, Lord, kill and eat. And it's all the animals that he was forbidden to partake of as a righteous Jew, a law-abiding Jew. But yet Jesus is commanding him to take and eat those creatures, implying that those Old Testament precepts are no longer binding on Christians in the New Covenant. And also, too, Bryce, you can check out Colossians chapter 2, verse 16. Listen to what St. Paul says. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or to a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are only a shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. So there you have Paul explicitly teaching us that we as Christians in the New Covenant are no longer bound by these precepts governing partaking of food and drink, or that is to say, the ritual precepts, right, that forbade certain food and certain drink for not moral reasons, reasons that would be a violation of the good of the human being, but precepts that were meant to keep the identity of the Israelites and to separate them from the pagan world. You also have these precepts concerning festivals, new moons, and the Sabbath. And Paul is saying, let no one pass judgment. So the ceremonial precept of the Old Covenant that obliged the Israelites to worship God on the Sabbath, right, the seventh day of the week, on Saturday, from their calculation, that's no longer binding on us. Hence, we as Christians, we fulfill the moral precept to worship God on Sunday, the day of the resurrection.
Bryce, thanks very much. I hope that was helpful for you, and you can keep calling. If the next one's really soon, you send us a $5 bill. That'll take care of it. Carla Broussard, our guest. We're talking about the Bible blueprint for the church. 888-318-7884.
Catholic Answers Live. We're here for you.
If you spend any time on Twitter, Facebook, or mainstream media, you're probably familiar with the litany of slogans that skeptics employ to rescue you from the foolish belief that God exists. The constant onslaught seems to leave people with the idea that they have no alternative but to embrace atheism. How can a Christian respond? In One Less God Than You, John DeRosa breaks down 20 of the most common atheist challenges and shows you how to craft effective answers. Atheism is more aggressive and widespread than ever. Read One Less God Than You and prepare yourself to respond with the joyful truth that God is real. To get your copy of One Less God Than You, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. This is a really good Monday, Nick. Mary Rice Haslam was really good. Carlo's always good. That's pretty good. I think you should tell Darren. He did a good job on Monday today. Our number here is 888-318-7884. If you're, we particularly, anyone is welcome to call, but we'd love to talk with our Protestant brothers and sisters who disagree with us about the nature of what Jesus did and what the Scripture says, actually, about what Jesus did in regard to founding a church. 888-318-7884 is the number. Maybe you are a Protestant person who believes the sola scriptura doctrine, which means that really there's only one authority. There can't be another authority. The one authority for our faith is the Bible, and it doesn't make sense to you that Catholics will say, in fact, there's another authority, the tradition of the church as taught to us via the magisterium of the church. If you're one of those and you'd like to have a conversation about it, 888-318-7884. I hope that doesn't sound dismissive when I said one of those, did I? No, I was just trying to looking for the right pronoun. But if you are a sola scriptura believer, then you simply don't agree with us on the church and on what the Bible says about the founding of the church, and that's a conversation we would love to have. 888-318-7884. Let's go back to the phones. Yeah, Joe in Pensacola, Florida. You are up next. I'm a little jealous. Joe's in Pensacola. Go ahead, Joe.
It's beautiful here. We got a fantastic bishop running our diocese.
Oh,
Going
wonderful.
back to the Anglican issue, so does a priest coming over from the Anglican Church get reordained?
Yes, if they're, assuming that they're not one of these priests who happen to have been ordained by a valid bishop that was not ordained under the rites coming from Henry VIII for Anglican orders, assuming and barring that scenario, the answer would be yes, that a priest who would have been, or quote-unquote, ordained under the invalid rite would not be a valid priest, and therefore, if he comes over into the church and converts, and the church allows for him and calls him and invites him to continue to function as a validly ordained priest in the Catholic Church, then he would have to be validly ordained, as my pastor was, who's Father Bartis, the pastor of our Anglican Ordinariate.
Okay, Joe?
Yes, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, Joe, when I said I'm jealous, I meant just that you're in Pensacola. I didn't mean of your bishop. Don't get me in trouble with my bishop like I'm saying.
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
I was bragging on our Bishop Block was the second one in the nation to return us to church.
Oh, God bless him. Good. So I just didn't want to get in trouble with my bishop, because we have a bishop who's very, very patient with us.
I was about to say in response, we got some pretty darn good weather here in Southern California right now.
Yeah,
if that's what you were referring to.
But they have the warm water too. We don't have warm water.
We can go walk on the beach, but you better not.
Don't go in.
You better not put a toe in that Pacific, man. It's going to kill you.
Thanks, Joe. You're a good sport. 888-318-7884, the number if you want to talk about the Bible blueprint for the Catholic, or well, I shouldn't say the Catholic Church, the Bible blueprint for the church, especially if you are, one of our Protestant brothers and sisters who disagrees with us on what the Bible has to say about the church, or disagrees with us on the authority of the church to say anything, because the Bible is the sole authority, because you believe in a sola scriptura understanding of, or the Bible alone understanding, Scripture alone understanding of the way authority works. 888-318-7884 number. Let's see who's on the phone. I say we're going to go to Ken right here in California, watching on YouTube Live. Ken, thank you very much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Carlo Broussard.
Good afternoon. I was just curious. Okay, so my question is in regards to Colossians 2:16. I called him before asking why Catholics have their Sabbaths on Sunday instead of Saturday, and Carlo brought up Colossians 2:16. My question is, why does Carlo uses the version or the translation in which it translates as just a Sabbath instead of other literal translations that would go on to say Sabbath as in plural? So you have the Doreen's version, and the New King James version would have the plural. So I think I would like to get Carlo's opinion on this, and why he would say, there's nothing really different there.
All right, well, Ken, I would have to look at the Greek text in order to see if Sabbath is plural or singular. I'm not sure. I don't have quick access to a Greek text right now. But I don't see how, whether it is singular or plural, how it would undermine the view that Paul is teaching us we're no longer bound by the ceremonial precept that we need to worship God on that particular day as the Israelites or the Jews did in the Old Testament. Because whether you say singular or a Sabbath or Sabbaths, the general idea is that we're no longer bound to follow that ceremonial precept on which day of the week we need to be worshiping God. Christians are freed of that obligation. And as I've argued before, eventually the day on which we are to worship God and fulfill the moral precept of the commandments would eventually develop and come, and the church would land on the day of the resurrection. That was the early Christian practice of breaking the bread, and the church would eventually sort of codify that as a disciplinary precept. But I don't see how a singular or a plural would in any way take away from that view of Colossians 2:16. Do you see any sort of reasoning that would lead you to conclude that if it were plural, that my argument wouldn't work?
Yes, I'm actually a Catholic, and I was arguing with a Seventh-day Adventist one day, And they mentioned that Sabbaths, as in plural, is different from a Sabbath, right? So they say, so for example, if I remember right, in the Bible, there are times where people can be unclean for a certain day, like for 7 days. Mm-hmm. And there are other times where it goes by months too. So for 7 months, something would happen, and then something else happened. So I think that's what the Seventh-day Adventist was heading towards, that there's a difference between the Sabbath versus Sabbath.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so let's see here. It is plural, so I'm looking at the Greek text. I was able to pull it up. It is plural. So I don't see how it being plural would, in fact, it being plural would seem to confirm.
That's what I was thinking too.
The Catholic position that
because the
Saint
Sabbath
Paul,
is within Sabbaths.
That's right. That's right. So, if it's plural, Sabbaths plural would seem to confirm the view, not just the Catholic view, of course, the view that Paul is teaching we're released from those precepts because there are many Sabbaths that we're bound, that the Jews would have been bound to worship God on. And also, too, I think I would say this, Ken, the one thing that jumped out at me is notice the context. Paul is speaking of these Sabbaths within the context of other ceremonial precepts that the Jews would have been bound to, namely the precepts of food and drink. Those are the precepts such that they were not flowing from our human nature, belonging to the natural moral law. They were positive laws from God. Also, too, precepts concerning or governing festivals and new moons. That's the context. That's the list in which the Sabbaths are listed. And so, however you roll the dice or slice the pie, we're talking about ceremonial precepts of the old law that do not flow from human nature, that do not belong to the natural moral law. Therefore, such precepts are subject to change. And given the other evidence that we have to complement what St. Paul is saying here, those sorts of precepts are no longer binding for us. Just as the ceremonial precepts governing food and drink are no longer binding, so too these other precepts that determine how and when God's people are to worship within the Old Covenant. Those precepts are no longer binding as well. Paul giving a few examples of that category of precepts. So that's what I would say to that.
And I think we better leave it there because we have to take another break. Carla Broussard is our guest. We're doing the Bible Blueprint for the Catholic. I keep saying that, but really it's for the church. The Bible Blueprint for the church. That's what this hour is. And if you'd like to challenge what Catholics believe about the Bible Blueprint for the church, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884 if you'd just like some clarification on what Catholics believe about what the Bible says about the church that Christ founded. 888-318-7884.
It's all about the truth. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
I have never seen women who want to be equal absolutely degrading themselves. And yet the media degrades your nature, your beauty as a woman, your goodness. Let us pray. At some point, our dear Lord touches their hearts.
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
Do you want to end abortion, halt the attack on traditional marriage, and ensure religious freedom for ourselves and for our grandchildren? To do this, we must convert the culture. St. Paul's Street Evangelization is a grassroots initiative that recognizes this need and takes it to the streets. If you're interested in peacefully sharing the gospel in your area, visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Carlo Broussard, our guest today. One of the places you might look to find out some of the ways that Carlo answers some of the challenges that we have heard to the Catholic faith on this program today is his book, Meeting the Protestant Challenge, How to Answer 50 Biblical Objections to Catholic Beliefs. I want to read you what somebody said about it. Sean said this. Great job, Carlo. I love apologetics, and this book is a great reference.
Awesome. I wonder if that's the same Sean that called in.
Oh, I wonder. Would you want to hear what Maureen says?
Sure.
One of the best books I've read to answer the Protestant fundamentalist accusation of veering from Christ's church.
Wow, that's very kind of her.
You want more?
Well,
we got to sell some books, Carla. Come on,
as
let
long
me
as
say
they
one.
give the glory and praise to the Lord.
All right. This is so good because I am an amateur apologist. This categorizes and gives great references for a quick look up. Helps on the anti-Catholic Facebook pages I am part of. Some people hate the Catholic Church with a passion. That's what Ed said.
Yeah, that is true.
Yep.
But we need to be sure that in response, we do so with charity.
Amen,
and
brother.
not returning the hate with hate.
Amen to that. You know what? You can get a deal on Carlo's book right now at shop.catholic.com. It's 30% off. You just put in the promo code challenge when you go get the book, Meeting the Protestant Challenge, one of Carlo's 3 books. Meeting the Protestant Challenge on sale, 30% off right now at shop.catholic.com, ends Sunday at midnight, but you got to put in the promo code challenge. Let's go to Anonymous, listening on St. Paul Catholic Radio. Anonymous, thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Carlo.
Yes. My question involves the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist.
Okay.
The Reformed Church uses John 6, like I've heard I listen to the radio a lot. I've heard the Catholic Church use the same reference, but the Reformed Church believes that Jesus, the part that says in memory of me,
right,
to do this.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so that's my question. How do you prove that Jesus is the real presence and not just we're doing something like memory?
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Great.
there you go. Great question, Anonymous. And speaking of my book, Meeting the Protestant Challenge, I actually have a chapter in that book, Anonymous, where I address this very question. And I put it in the form of a challenge. How can the Catholic Church teach that Eucharistic celebration is the offering of Christ's actual body and blood when Jesus only intended for the apostles to perform the Last Supper as a remembrance? This is coming from Luke 22:19, where Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me." The Greek word there is anamnesis. So here's the first thing that comes to mind and that we need to say, Anonymous. We affirm that the reenactment of the Last Supper at the Mass is a remembrance. It is a memorial of what Christ did at the Last Supper and his offering of his life on the cross. It is indeed a reenactment that is a memorial. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church affirms this in paragraph 1362. But the real question, Anonymous, becomes, what kind of memorial is this? Is it merely an act of remembrance, a recollection of what was done for us in the past? Well, in answer to that question, we can say, no, it can't be merely a recollection, because what Jesus is doing at the Last Supper, Anonymous, he teaches us in John 6 is supernatural in nature. There's something supernatural going on, because remember in John 6, Jesus gave his teaching about his flesh being the bread of life against the backdrop of the manna in the Old Testament, which was supernatural. It was miraculous. And so what Jesus is giving us at the Last Supper, the Eucharist, is the new manna, which means the new manna, the Eucharist at the Last Supper, is going to be supernatural. Because if it weren't, if it's just bread and wine, well then the new manna would be inferior to the old manna, which was miraculous. But that's a no-go in biblical theology. So given the supernatural context, that gives us an initial reason, Anonymous, to conclude that what Jesus is commanding the apostles to do cannot be merely a recollection, but it's going to be some memorial, some recollection that's going to have a supernatural dimension to it. So then the question becomes, well, What is that supernatural dimension? Well, as the Catechism points out in paragraph 1362, the Eucharist is the making present and the sacramental offering of Christ's unique sacrifice. In other words, in the liturgical remembrance, what the Catechism calls the anamnesis, coming from the Greek text there in Luke 22:19, this liturgical remembrance has power to it, right? It makes present that historical event which we are liturgically remembering. And this is based on the Jewish understanding of liturgical remembrance. Within the Passover, whenever the Passover is celebrated, the Jews understood that at whatever moment in time in the history of salvation they're celebrating the Passover, they are in some way mystically made present to those events. Or to state it differently, those saving events are mystically made present to them such that the participants in the ritual, in the Passover liturgy or ritual, actually participate in those events. And I cite some of the resources in this particular chapter in my book. And so what this leads us to the conclusion is that what Jesus is doing at the Last Supper is within the context of the Passover meal, where you have this already understanding, this assumed understanding that what goes on in the Passover liturgy is a remembrance that is making present the saving events of God where we participate in them. But what Jesus is doing at the Last Supper is transforming the old Passover into the new Passover. And the new Passover and the liturgy involved now is going to remember, liturgically speaking, the saving event of God, the greatest saving event, the death of our Lord Jesus Christ. And in that liturgical remembrance of that saving deed in the salvation history, it will be mystically made present so that the participants in the new Passover liturgy, which is the Mass, can participate, be present to that saving event and bear the fruits of that saving event. So that's how we are to understand the remembrance in Luke 22:19. We are to understand it in light of the Jewish understanding of a liturgical remembrance, which makes the participants in the liturgical remembrance participate in the saving events that they were remembering.
Anonymous, I don't know how committed you are to being anonymous. Maybe you don't want to give us your address, but if you will hang on the line and give us your address, I'll send you a copy of Carlos Meeting the Protestant Challenge, where he's got that chapter in there dealing with just this question. Hang on and just let Marie know if that's what you would like to do. Going now to Brandon. Yeah, I can go to Brandon. Brandon in Georgia watching on YouTube Live. Brandon, go ahead with your question for Carlo.
Yes, sir. My question was that how to answer to Protestants when they say to only go to God and to only Scripture and not go through any like priests or the church or anything, just go to God and interpret only what the Bible says.
Okay, good question, Brandon. So there's quite a few different questions there. So one question was, why not just go straight to God? Why go to a priest? Well, the answer to that question would be because Jesus established a priesthood to minister to his people on earth. Now, granted, in the conversation, we're going to have to give the evidence for that. So you could look to the apostles. In the New Testament, we see that Jesus gives the apostles priestly functions. In John 20:23, he tells them, whosoever sins you forgive, they are forgiven. Whosoever sins you retain, they are retained. That is a ministry of reconciling people back to God, of administering the forgiveness of sins, which is a priestly function. They're also to baptize, to make disciples by baptizing people, according to Matthew 28:19. That's yet another sacramental function that falls under the broader category of priestly functions. The apostles are meant to teach the people of God. Matthew 28, go out into all nations and teach them everything that I've commanded you. So we see that Jesus has set up his church in such a way, Brandon, that he does not will his people and people who will eventually become his people in the covenantal relationship. He doesn't will that we go straight to him apart from these constituted officials that he's sending out to govern and lead his church, but in and through them. Now, granted, in prayer, we go straight to God in the privacy of our room, right? But within the church, Jesus has set it up in such a way that there's going to be these human instruments, these ministers to oversee the people of God, to guide the flock of God, these shepherds. Now, to get to the other question, Brandon, you talked about, why the church and not just Scripture. The answer to that question, Brandon, is found in the New Testament itself, because that's not how the early Christians function. That was not the blueprint for Christian life in the first century. I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, Brandon, that in the first century, there was a theological dispute as to whether Gentile converts needed to be circumcised or not. And so what did those early Christians do? They took it to the church. And there was a body of constituted teaching officials, the apostles and the presbyters, who settled the dispute and issued a decree binding everyone to obey it with regard to the teaching for everyone and the disciplinary precepts, like don't partake of blood, for the new Gentile converts. So the Council of Jerusalem, Brandon, gives us a great example of why we do not believe that the Scriptures or the Bible is our sole infallible authority. Is it our infallible authority? Yes, but it's not our only infallible authority, because what we see in the New Testament is that Jesus established a body of living teaching officials who have his authority to teach infallibly and thus bind the consciences of Christians to believe that which they teach. And of course, they have the judicial authority as well, but that's besides the point. And so we can see in what I've said so far, Brandon, is that we go to the priests because that's the way Jesus set it up. Jesus wills that we come to him in and through, in this visible form, through the ministry of his ordained ministers. They are meant to guide and lead us to greater intimacy with Christ. And with regard to the church or the Bible, it's both and, it's not either or. And we see that explicitly in the New Testament itself.
Brandon, thank you. Appreciate your call. Carla Broussard is our guest. We're talking about the Bible blueprint for the church. Carla, if I could just give you one real quick before we go, because it does come up again and again. In Matthew's Gospel, I think it's Matthew's Gospel, it does say where 2 or 3 of you or 2 or more of you are gathered in my name, there I am also. Often I hear Protestant people use this as an objection to the Catholic Church, like, well, Jesus told us what constitutes the church. Just get a couple people together.
In the name of Jesus.
Right, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, the claim is that the church is merely invisible, where we're bound together by the life of God or grace dwelling in the soul. That's the church.
Yeah.
And the implication is that the visible dimension is excluded. And as you mentioned, some do appeal to Matthew 18:20, where Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. But what those who appeal to this passage fail to realize is that just a few verses earlier, in verses 15 through 17, Jesus gives us the blueprint for functioning as a church and what we are to do when we have disputes, particularly concerning sin. Even Jesus says, if your brother sins against you or offends you, go and try to convince your brother. So there's what we have here is the brother is in error, and we're supposed to go and try to convince him of his error to win him over. Right. And then Jesus says, if you can't win him over, take 2 or 3 witnesses with you.
Oh, yeah.
And if you still can't convince them, Jesus says, take it to the church.
Yeah.
And then there are severe consequences if the individual even fails to listen to the church, or if he fails to obey the church. In other words, if he disobeys the church. And Jesus says, if he fails to listen to the church, treat him as a Gentile or a tax collector. That implies he's no longer in the Christian community.
Yeah, he's out.
So we see Jesus establishing a hierarchical structure within the church right before he says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. And I would argue, as I do in my book, that what he's saying in verse 20 connects with verses 18 and 19, and he's referring to the apostles on earth agreeing about something, and the Father will ratify it in heaven.
Got it.
Bind and loose on earth, bound and loose in heaven.
Thanks, Carla.
Thank you, Si.
Carla Broussard's been our guest. His book's on sale right now at shop.catholic.com. One of his books, anyways, Meeting the Protestant Challenge. It covers a lot of stuff we covered today. Just go to shop.catholic.com, put in the promo code CHALLENGE, and you get 30% off Carla's book, Meeting the Protestant Challenge. Tomorrow, 2 hours of open forum. I think it's Jimmy. Is Jimmy here with us 2 hours tomorrow? Is that who we got? Yep, 2 hours with Jimmy Akin. We'll see you then, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.